For this video, I'm going to show you how to put all of the lines and markings onto your mold, and all of this information comes from your mold cut plan. For this, you're going to need a meter stick. You might want a speed square. You might want a protractor. You'll definitely need a Sharpie and a ruler. You may even want a calculator. And sometimes it helps to have the sample trucks just to help visualize, but not required. The first thing that you're going to want to do is kind of check both sides of your mold. This side is quite dented and messed up a little bit, so I'm going to make this the back. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you have put your name on it and your class section or class group, and then decide on which end is going to be your nose and your tail and get them labeled. This nicer, kind of smoother side, this is the side that I'm going to use to actually mark up with all of my measurements. So the first thing that we need to do is always work from the center of our mold out. We're not actually cutting this mold to size or shape of your board. We're only using it to help with things like the concave, the kicks, and the drops. So to do that, we need to find the center of our board first. So overall, they're all slightly different. None of them are exactly the same size. So you actually have to measure and do the math to calculate that number. So I'm just going to kind of line it up here. The total length of this mold is 850. I divide that number by 2 to get 425. I go over and I find 425 and I add a dot. So this is going to become my center marker. You can use a speed square to help with this, just to kind of get things lined up if you want to help you draw a line, or if you just want to use a ruler. Either works. You can kind of see where I'm going here with my line. Okay, so I'm going to use the speed square. I'm going to go this way to connect on this side. Square isn't quite long enough. So now I've got my center of my board, or not of my board, of my mold, split in half. Now what I need to do is find this center so I can draw a line this way. So, same idea, I need to measure the width and divide by 2, or divide it in half. So this looks like 250. So 250 divided by 2, I'm in millimeters. So this is 125 millimeters. So I'm going to find my 125, get a dot there, just enough to make a little bit of a mark. Okay, so there's my 125. Before I just go and draw one big long line, it might also be helpful to do that towards the end of your board. So kind of just create a few dots along your mold to help you keep things in line. 125, you can have as many dots as you want. Doesn't really matter. And then I can just connect my dots to create my center line. Okay, things so that we have all of this to help us as we go. So this is my center line. Okay. In addition to the lines going across the top here, we want them both to extend on either end. So you can use the ruler, you can use the speed square, whatever is the most helpful. Kind of prop that up. It's a square, actually. And I'm just continuing that line down the back, so that you can see it kind of continue around. I'm going to do the same here. Same thing on the nose and the tail. Use a ruler just so you can see how that works. Same idea. And then it's extending off either end. Alright, so I've got my center lines, lengthwise, widthwise. I'm ready for my next step. So in terms of my mold cut plan, what we need to do is mark the inside and outside where the trucks will be. So this inside one is the really important one. This is going to be our wheelbase. So your wheelbase number will come from your specifications. It might be different than mine. For example, my wheelbase in this design is 320 millimeters. So instead of just measuring 320 millimeters, there's 320 on this ruler, and just kind of eyeballing it, you would take your number, so 320 divided by 2, that's 160, and I would go 160 millimeters out from the center. We're always measuring out from the center. So 160 millimeters, and I'm going to create a little mark, and then 160 millimeters. Create a little mark. And then I can check that. If I kind of total that up, that should be my 320 millimeters wheelbase. So same idea, I can use the speed square, I can use a ruler to help me pencil this line. This board in particular is a shorter popsicle style board. It has a fairly short wheelbase. And same idea, I'm going to extend those measurements down. So this represents my inside wheelbase. So I'm just going to say inside wheelbase. So inside wheelbase, the trucks are standard dimensions or standard sized. So those are numbers that you weren't able to change. And these are kind of the jig to help with that. 75 millimeters. 75 millimeters. I'm going to measure from my wheelbase marker. So 75 centimeters. There's, 75 millimeters. I'm getting really mixed up here. So from 75 millimeters, I'm gonna leave it a little mark. And I can kind of just see that like that's going to be the standard truck size that I have to work with. So from my inside base plate to the outside of the truck base plate. I can use the speed square again, I can use a ruler, it is up to you. So this is really where my trucks would be going within my board. So this becomes the outer wheelbase. And instead of writing the label on the outside, because eventually this will get carved off, I'm gonna write it on the inside of this. Some of you have different kicks and different tails. My particular design is a symmetrical design, so the kick and the length of the nose and the tail are symmetrical or exactly the same. So if yours are not, you really want to make sure that you've got nose and tail. You can even add that on here. It's okay if we carve it off because we do have it on the back. I'm just gonna make sure I know this is my nose, this is my tail, because now what I want to look at is the length of those that will help us measure our drop, but I'm also going to measure our drop line here. So the drop line is what's going to go on the side, and we'll end up drawing it on both sides. So I'm going to start with this one, and we're basically measuring down from our center to our drop height. So our concave drop height, my board, so my particular concave drop is 10 millimeters. So I will go from my center line here, go down 1 centimeter or 10 millimeters. I'm gonna make a little mark. And I might actually just do that across a few points so I can line up things. Line up my dots. check because this dot doesn't look on. Nope, it is. So I've got my dots in line. And rather than trying to carve into the mold, because your ruler can move and you want your measurements to be accurate, slightly pencil things in. And if you have to cover over it a couple of times, that's it. So this represents my concave drop. So I've got my concave drop, and I'm going to do the same thing this side. All right, now what we need to do is measure the length of our nose and the length of our tail. It shouldn't be longer than the mold, otherwise you would have had to adjust your wheelbase. So if you're right to the end of your mold, if you're at your maximums, you don't actually need to draw in this line because you're just going to be using the end of your mold to measure. But for me, in my design, my tail length from my outer wheelbase is 14 centimeters or 140 millimeters. And my board is symmetrical, so I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to measure out 14 centimeters, make a mark. I'm going to use my speed square to label my nose and my tail. Same thing with the other line. I want to carry those lines forward onto the side. I'm going to need to line these things up. Alright, so the lines will carry down. I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side as well. Now I have my tail length, nose length. I'm going to write that inside here. Nose length. So now what we need to do is the nose and tail drop height. So for the nose and the tail drop height, you're going to go from the length line, so from the top of my board here on my length line, and I'm going to take my measurement. So for my board, I have a 20 millimeter or 2 centimeter drop. So I'm going to go down to 2 centimeters from the top. A little mark. So this is my 2 centimeters, and that line that gets connected to the outer wheelbase line, and I can just kind of extend it across. Just line it up here. This is the spot that we are going to be cutting off. We want to carry this line across the front and across the other side of the board. So I've already done the other side of the board, so now I'm going to want to do that front line, connect that line across. You could use a speed square too if you want. And that line now connects all the way around my board. This is the piece that will get cut off, and it kind of lets us know our limit, that like all of this is going to be cut off eventually as we start to create the shape of our board. You don't have to draw those lines in, they're going to get cut off. The final measurement is to create our pan line. So the pan line represents the width of the base plate for the trucks. And this is because we want to make sure that when we're shaping our mold, that these are our hard limits, that we can't actually go in this way or in through the nose or the tail, because the truck needs a flat surface to sit. And if we carve away too much, we're going to have a little bit of a wiggle here. So these have a default or standard size, which was in your mold cut plan. So 55 millimeters. So Again, we always want to measure out from the center. So 55 divided by 2, 27.5 on each side. So I'm just gonna start where the trucks are. So 27.5 is about here. Just gonna go and create my dot. 27.5. And then I can actually kind of see like, yeah, okay, well my truck is gonna fit within that to create these pan lines here. I'm just gonna make a couple of those marks throughout. And then I can use a square, I can use my ruler, but I'm creating, just gonna line this up with the edge here. Same on this side. So this center area becomes the pan of my board. So this is known as the pan line. And these are your rail lines. So the trucks would sit in there. You might choose to have a wider pan, that's okay. But these markings represent your limits that you can't carve within for your concave.